All right, we are live on Monero Talk with Kyle Torpey, a Bitcoin or cryptocurrency journalist, who I guess you're current most frequently on Forbes and Bitcoin Magazine. Is that correct, Kyle?
Yeah, mostly there and Long Hash too, which is like a newer site.
Good to have you, man. Certainly familiar with your work and your name. You've been around in the space, I guess, for quite some time now. Particularly enjoy your Forbes articles. How long have you been around? How long have you been a journalist in the space?
I think like January 2014. Before that, I was writing stuff just like for fun for like probably 6 months or so, and then one of the pieces I was writing for fun got some popularity on Reddit, and then the Kaiser Report talked about it on their show, and then I started getting job offers based off that, and yeah, I've been writing about Bitcoin full time ever since.
Awesome. And you obviously have a very good understanding of the space and the technology. At least that's my opinion. Would you say that your kind of understanding, obviously to some degree, an opinion has evolved throughout the years, or is kind of the, your eureka moment that you've had? Because I'm sure, we all had that eureka moment kind of with blockchain. Has that evolved, or is it kind of still what it was the day it first hit you?
Yeah, the eureka moments don't really happen as often as they used to, but I mean, I think there's always still plenty to learn, and when it comes to topics related to Bitcoin, because there's so many different, areas involved in it, whether it's economics or computer science or go down the line. I do think because when I first became interested in Bitcoin, I would say it was I saw this article in Gawker in like the middle of 2011 about Silk Road, and I didn't really know anything about cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, or even like Onion sites and the Tor browser and that kind of thing before that. So I thought, I didn't think it would be possible for people to be buying drugs online and getting away with it for an extended period of time. So that's what first kind of piqued my interest. But I was also a like Ron Paul guy before Bitcoin, so I was somewhat of a gold bug, interested in monetary policy, things like that. So that wasn't as strong as a pull for me into the space at first, but I've come to I think these days I think more about Bitcoin in terms of a monetary phenomenon rather than like the censorship resistant transactions. One of my first eureka moments, I thought the the underlying core value here was I would say those kind of Silk Road-esque transactions that weren't possible before, but that's really only possible if you have a trustworthy uncontrollable monetary policy that's trustless also built underneath. So I think that 21 million cap of Bitcoin is kind of like the main thing that makes everything else possible, kind of. You can build like payments and everything else on top of that, but you have to have that trustworthy store of value, I would say, first. And we're definitely still like in the development stage of the store of value case of Bitcoin, I would say.
So that's interesting. Yeah. So you initially kind of saw the invention of Bitcoin being more about digital peer-to-peer payments that had this censorship-resistant aspect to it, and now you see more of the invention being, I guess, digital gold, right? So
well, and I think the biggest learning, the biggest education in that regard, I think, came for a lot of people with the whole block size debate in Bitcoin. They made Bitcoin Cash and as kind of like an experiment, and that's kind of I mean, I haven't looked at the market cap in a while, but it's really fallen off since, it was first launched. I think it's down something like 90% against Bitcoin alone. So I think we've seen this, kind of play out in the market where, that digital gold use case has definitely, especially this year, and I would say last year too, the altcoin market, it really kind of took a huge hit. So I think the digital gold use case is kind of at the forefront right now, and I think that's what the market values the most, from what I can tell.
So, is what kind of changed your opinion? Was it the market itself seeing what's kind of being adopted, or was it more of a realization of what the actual invention was? I mean, because the invention itself hasn't changed much since the Satoshi white paper. It's fundamentally the same thing as what was invented. But
I think it's more like my view of what was important changed, because obviously, like you said, Bitcoin doesn't really change much at the protocol level. And yeah, we had like, was it like $40-$50 fees on Bitcoin in late 2017, and people were still willing to pay those fees because, right now people are still just trying to kind of gain access to this new asset class as a store of value kind of. So the way I look at it is, if you have like $10,000 and you want to invest that in Bitcoin for like a 10-year period or something like that, then, I mean, that's why people were willing to pay those incredibly ridiculous fees, because as of now, we're still, there's not really much payments adoption at all. So people are willing to pay those ridiculous fees because, it's just a one-time payment to gain access to that store value use case.
Now, I guess, but why is that store of value a bigger breakthrough than something that already existed, like gold itself? Then at that point, like why is it something we what was the invention then? I mean, because we already had like real gold, right, where you could essentially store your value, and same concept. It's just the value comes from scarcity and the fact that there's a network effect there. What was then the breakthrough with Bitcoin?
In terms of store of value, it would be it's much more difficult for it to be seized. I remember Nick Szabo talking about this a long time ago, where he gave a presentation on why. I don't know if this is the entire point of the whole presentation, but one of the points he made was, for even central banks of actual governments, they should probably prefer something like Bitcoin over gold, just because it's much harder to seize. So if, a lot of central banks store their gold with the United States, maybe they could store it themselves if it was in the form of Bitcoin. When a nation gets toppled by another nation, or a coup happens, or an uprising happens, a revolution of some sort, one of the first things they'll go after is try to seize the monetary assets held by the central bank. So in that way, an example of that would be actually happened recently with Venezuela. They were storing gold with, I forget the bank, some bank in the UK, I believe. So their gold reserves were just seized at some point in the past year. If they were holding Bitcoin, it wouldn't have been possible.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't mean to like completely undermine the censorship resistant payments aspect. I just think it's difficult for that to be possible without the underlying store value use case. And you need that store value use case to develop so people can eventually use it as a reliable unit of account over time.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I mean, I agree with you on all those points. And I certainly think store of value, as you're describing it, is kind kind of the first step. Like you got to get that right. And that's what creates the network effect and gets everybody onto it. But then, so even if you're looking at it purely from that standpoint, or you see that as kind of being the most essential component, don't you think then things like censorship resistance and fungibility, which would come from privacy, don't those things help improve that aspect? So even like the examples you're given, I mean, I guess what would be better than digital gold would be digital gold that can't be tracked or traced. So it becomes even more difficult for people to censor and potentially confiscate it. So what's your opinion there in terms of making it definitely confiscatable and censorship resistant through privacy?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I'm definitely, I'm not really a fan of altcoins in terms of like the proposal of them as like an investment. I see them more as like test nets. And when it comes to the altcoins, I don't think there's probably a better one than Monero in terms of, where they're innovating in terms of privacy. So I definitely think that's a key aspect, but I would say it's not really, something that many people are desiring right now, because we are still, it's hard to use Bitcoin for payments for a variety of reasons. So people aren't really, we look at the development of the Lightning Network. Everyone was really excited about that, and people can use it today, but there's not really that many people using, the Lightning Network for payments, as far as I'm aware.
But for Bitcoin itself, even if it's just purely, we're talking about digital gold, store of value, do you think the protocol is good enough for achieving that result? Or do you think something like Monero has features that are necessary to achieve that? Is Bitcoin good enough to achieve the standard of digital gold? Its lack of fungibility, is that not a flaw to the point where it wouldn't become the desired universal protocol for being digital gold?
I think it probably does need better privacy, but a lot of that was kind of already enabled with SegWit. That was, people think of that as like a scalability improvement, but it was also extremely important for privacy. So for example, the Lightning Network, it was technically possible before SegWit was implemented, but it made the Lightning Network much more easier to implement in a more efficient manner. And the Lightning Network itself, it takes transactions off chain, which can, if the information is on the blockchain, then that's obviously a gain for privacy. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done. Taproot and Schnorr are probably going to be the next big improvements to Bitcoin that will also have huge gains for privacy. With signature aggregation, basically regular Bitcoin payments will look the same as multi-sig, and then Taproot adds more transaction functionality without putting that information on the blockchain as well. So basically they'll be able to implement more complex smart contracts without, I think the Ethereum approach is more less private over there. So yeah, basically all these Bitcoin transactions are going to be looking the same, but one could be a simple transaction from me to you. Another one could be like a Lightning channel opening or close. Another one could be like a coin join. Eventually all these are going to look the same on the blockchain to someone who's looking at it. But I do think confidential transactions is something that Bitcoin, that would be like the final big improvement for Bitcoin privacy, I think, and it's unclear. I mean, it's already on Liquid, so like people can play around with it today. And I know Wasabi Wallet is like thinking about implementing CoinJoin with confidential transactions on Liquid, but it's kind of, I mean, Liquid is like a federated sidechain, so regulators could just, maybe shut down the Liquid sidechain if people start using it to gain, a lot more privacy with their Bitcoin. Although it'd be interesting if they did that, if they would shut down like Ripple and EOS, because, those are similarly centralized, but I think regulators just haven't kind of figured that out yet. Although there are some like congressmen that have been talking about, the key differences between Libra and Bitcoin, where Libra is like much more Facebook's Libra project. I mean, and how that's like much more centralized than Bitcoin, and they're kind of like two different things. So they're starting to get it a little bit more. So it kind of would be interesting to see what would happen if someone pushed the envelope and kind of implemented CoinJoin on top of Liquid with confidential transactions, because that would definitely be private enough in my eyes for Bitcoin, but obviously it's not on the base chain, so it's not as trustless and censorship resistant.
And so, yeah, and do you see Bitcoin having the kind of the political will to get there internally as a community to add things like confidential transactions? Like, is it even possible for Bitcoin, as we know, Bitcoin Core, to evolve in that way? Would everybody be on board with that, or is the cat kind of already out of the bag and it's too difficult at this point, given the fact that they would have to consider the repercussions from governments or people that are already invested in its current form? Do you think it has the ability politically to evolve in that way?
I definitely think the plan all along has kind of been cypherpunk, digital cash money for Bitcoin. So I don't think increased privacy would be necessarily a controversial change. There might be some, SegWit wasn't supposed to be controversial either, but obviously that took a while to get activated. I think with something like confidential transactions, it seems like it will have to come in the form of like a sidechain or an extension block, where it's, you still have the complete verifiability on the base Bitcoin blockchain. Because there is an issue with confidential transactions where you kind of have to choose. I'm not like a super technical expert on this, but my understanding is you have to kind of choose between like perfect verifiability of the supply versus perfect unbreakable privacy. And you can't really have both in the face of quantum computing. So there is that aspect to think about it, but I think as long as it's opt-in via like a sidechain or extension blocks, then I think that's how it can work eventually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've had shows on that as well. That's kind of the ultimate, one of the ultimate criticisms of something like Monero. Like, well, it's great that it's perfectly private, or versus, but it's potentially lacking in its ability to be audited. But that's, there's a lot of arguments that dispute that, and like you said, it's really in the scenario where quantum computing exists. And I guess the major counter argument that's made to that by the Monero community is, well, if that's the case, then Bitcoin is also could potentially be affected by this quantum computing as well, right? So not only would Monero's the ability to secretly create Monero would be a possibility, but also the ability to just break a Bitcoin private key and steal the Monero and steal all the Bitcoin. Yeah. So it's like if the quantum computer problem, I don't know, that's a tough one for me.
I think that does get back into what I was saying about having like the store value at the base layer, though, because what you could do with Bitcoin is what you're basically doing with like an extension block or sidechain or Lightning is you're making sure that the store value use case is like secure, and that's like the ultimate thing to make sure it doesn't break and everyone can verify everything. And then a layer above that is where you can put, you know, this kind of cypherpunk digital cash vision that which was also a big part of why Bitcoin was created in the first place. And I mean, I've always been a fan of like the Tumblebit idea from years ago that didn't seem to get much traction since then, where you basically have, you know, these off-chain digital cash servers that you don't have to trust. They can't steal your money. They don't know who you're sending money to. And obviously it's also great for, you know, the payments use case because you basically have the benefits of complete centralization in terms of fast, quick, instant confirmations. And you also have, you know, very good privacy. And you don't have to trust, similar to the Lightning Network, you don't have to trust where you're depositing your money. So that'd be interesting. I just saw a paper last month where someone talked about combining confidential transactions with Tumblebit. Because, yeah, even if you have Tumblebit where you're depositing money to the server, if you don't have confidential transactions, you can still see, you know, how much money people are sending to those Tumblebit servers. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways that better privacy can come to Bitcoin, but it won't be at like the very base layer. Just because, yeah, that, as I said before, that 21 million, the trustworthiness of that monetary policy is like that's a very key ingredient to the puzzle here.
Right. Yeah, I know. I struggle with the Bitcoin because I feel like there's a lot of contradiction in the arguments that are made. I mean, like, so security is kind of the top priority, right? So we need to have, you know, if this is going to be digital gold, it needs to be secure, and we need to kind of mimic gold on that level, right? So if that's the case, then shouldn't it be our larger concern for the distribution of the network itself, right? Because that plays into security. The more distributed the network is, the more secure the network is. The 21 million, it's great. It's great from an economic perspective to kind of bootstrap the environment, has everybody kind of running and hodling their coins. But from a security standpoint, it leaves a big question mark as to what will happen when we approach that 21 million and there's no coins left to mine. And, you know, you hear Bitcoin, very smart Bitcoin people making the argument, well, we're worried about quantum computing, so that's why we don't want to, add confidential transactions, because then you may, you know, be able to secretly produce Bitcoin. But we're not worried about the fact we don't know what's going to happen when we approach that 21 million mark, and there may not be an incentive for miners to secure the network. So I kind of struggle with that, because that seems like more of an obvious worry than quantum computers, right? So like, let's get confidential transactions in Bitcoin. You know, I think the quantum computing thing seems like less of a concern than the big question mark of what happens when there's no longer a clear incentive to mine and secure the network. So if security's first, if security priority, then why isn't that a major consideration or concern for Bitcoin?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think when it comes to like the biggest issues with Bitcoin, you know, there was all those scalability concerns for the longest time. But to me, like, bigger issues are, one, privacy, and two, mining centralization. I mean, and they're kind of intertwined, because if you have better privacy, then those mining centralization kind of becomes less of an issue, because no one really knows, you can't differentiate between transactions, so it kind of makes it harder to censor. But obviously then, you know, if you have 51% of the network, you can just censor all transactions if you want to. So there's that too. And And there are, the community or the user base doesn't seem as concerned about mining centralization as maybe they should. I mean, that proposal from Matt Corallo for, taking control of transaction selection, Better Hash, that's what it's called. Taking control of transaction selection away from the pools and towards the individual miners would be incredibly useful. And I know Slush Pool is working on, a similar mining protocol that would be helpful in that regard. So, go ahead.
Yeah. Let's. That's the article. You great article, by the way. Let's get into that more. But yeah, but first, just that question of security. So, Bitcoiners, Bitcoin maximalists, they're concerned about security, priority security. One of the major priority security. So yes, the decentralization of the network being one concern, which you're touching upon, but then also, this idea of the 21 million cap and leaving a big question mark as to what will there be an incentive to mine and secure the network? Is just the fact that it's an unknown, is that a security issue that we don't know what mining will look like in the future in terms of incentive models, whereas something like Monero that has the tail emission, and we know there'll forever be mining taking place. Are there thoughts there? Because that seems, like I said, that seems to be contradictory to the let's make security priority number one.
Well, it's kind of, I can definitely envision a world where transaction fees do end up being enough to secure the network, but it's definitely not something that's, definite. In terms of, fixing that, I'm not sure. I know there was a recent paper from Hasu, the guy on Twitter. I don't know his real name. I think he might be pseudonymous, where he was talking about this issue of the block subsidy eventually going to zero, and he threw in a few proposals. Another one, besides increasing the cap, would be having this sort of like all the businesses that benefit from Bitcoin just kind of donate money to the miners every year. Obviously, you have some incentive issues there where like maybe one company doesn't want to do that. I think we'll just have to kind of see what happens there. But if you want to talk about like if that does require a hard fork, which I can't remember exactly if it does, that would be a situation where a hard fork would be possible, because it's one of the situations where Bitcoin basically doesn't work unless everyone does this. So, I mean, that when it comes to hard forks in Bitcoin, I think those are kind of the only ones that are possible when you're like fixing a bug, or it's like the network simply doesn't work unless you move over to this new thing. So that could be, in terms of mining centralization, like if 51%, like there's 50 something or around 50% of the miners are in one province in China, I think, from one of the last reports I read. So if China was able to round up all those miners and they started censoring the Bitcoin blockchain completely, it would cease to work for everyone. So the hard fork to a new proof of work algorithm would work. And so a similar situation would be if Bitcoin is like literally doesn't work because there's not enough incentive for miners to mine, then a hard fork would have to happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me that's kind of a big unknown. But yeah, let's focus in on the article, which you started to touch upon. So the idea being Bitcoin mining has become more centralized over time. I don't think anybody can dispute that. And the fact that it's also not private is a potential recipe for disaster, where governments can knock on Bitcoin miners' doors and essentially tell them to censor transactions. And so, yeah, if you want to continue to touch upon that, I guess, so there's the idea is, I guess, well, Bitcoin mining itself is centralized to a degree. It's not that there's 5 guys mining. It's just that most of these guys pool together, and there's maybe 5 pools that control the vast majority of the Bitcoin network. But the idea is that maybe there'll be new technology implemented that would, despite the fact that there's 1 or 2 people controlling the pools, the miners themselves, I guess, that are part of that pool would effectively be able to not be controlled by the pool in terms of what transactions they validate, right? Is that the kind of the thinking there? That
yeah, that's I think Matt Corallo had the first proposal, and now Slushpool has like a completely new mining protocol that implements a lot of what Matt was talking about. And I don't know if it was a BIP, but whatever proposal he had, called a Better Hash.
Do we think that will likely get implemented? Are there any reasons to believe that the miners or the pools won't want to adopt that?
I think that's what Slushpool has been working on. So there are reasons that miners don't necessarily want to choose their own transactions. The whole mining process just works more efficiently for them, I think, if the pool handles that. So Slushpool has been working on creating this new mining protocol that's more secure, more efficient, and they're just kind of throwing this Better Hash thing in there too. But you're right, miners will have to opt into, taking control of their own transaction selection, which means they'll also have to run a full node. So that, yeah, there are some things that would push back adoption of this, but on the other hand, miners are incentivized to make Bitcoin as decentralized as they can, because that's the whole value proposition, right? Is censorship resistance in terms of the payments. And we have seen miners, proactively promote this decentralization in the past. There was like ghash.io, when they were the big mining pool, got over, or they're approaching like 50%, and everyone freaked out on Reddit. So then
I think it was the only time I sold some Bitcoin, other than eventually moving all my Bitcoin to Monero. But that was the only time when I was into, I think it was
I think Peter Todd made like
Peter Todd had made a Reddit post that was before I knew he was the ultimate skeptic and alarmist. But there was that. We managed to bounce back from that like it never happened. Like it was And those were, looking back now, those were very early days. It didn't seem like it at the time, but and then there was in that, I based that Forbes article off an interview that Bitcoin Magazine did with the CEO of Poolin, which is one of the top 3 pools now. And one of the other things, I don't remember if I included it in the Forbes article, but one of the things that the Poolin CEO said was, one of his large miners was asking him about how to pull his hash rate off of the pool. And he was saying, like, why is our mining pool like not working out for you? Is there anything we can do? He says, no, you're just getting too big, and we need to keep Bitcoin decentralized. So there are, the miners do, at least some of them do understand that they need to, keep the hash rate somewhat decentralized at least. And I think we are seeing, I agree with you that Bitcoin mining has become much more centralized over time, but over the past maybe year, we are starting to see, I think, a move towards more decentralization, kind of swinging back in the other direction. We're seeing hash rate leave China,
and go into places like Texas. Blockstream announced their facilities, in I think they have a facility in somewhere in Canada and somewhere in Georgia in the U.S. There's
But
this,
is that actually making a dent? Is that actually making
from
it?
what I understand, yes, but I haven't seen official reports on it yet. It's also kind of hard. I mean, we have those like hash rate distribution graphs that show the distribution based on the pools, but what really matters obviously is the actual where's the hardware and who's in control of that, because people can point their hardware at whatever pool they want. I mean, there is like the Peter Thiel backed company that's building a huge mining facility in Texas. Bitmain just opened a large facility in Texas. So we are seeing more, geographic decentralization, I think.
Yeah. I don't have a good, idea of or concept of whether or not recently it's becoming more decentralized again. But I mean, overall, it's certainly the trend has been to become more centralized over time. I mean, people used to be able to mine Bitcoin on their computers, and now it's mined by warehouses in wherever in China.
Yeah, and the problem is there's not really a solution for that. I know Monero has been playing around with changing the proof of work algorithm, and now they're developing their own ASICs. Yeah, and I have to be skeptical on RandomX just because I've heard so many coins over the years saying that they're building like the ASIC resistant algorithm. Although I do have a lot more respect for the guys behind Monero than probably any other altcoin. So
it's certainly something to keep your eye on. It appears to be a major breakthrough. Skepticism, sure. I would certainly maintain skepticism there, but it does appear to be moving in the right direction, and it looks like it's actually going to achieve what it intends to achieve. I mean, basically, what it is achieving, it's turning the CPU into the ASIC. So the most efficient, so basically, specialized hardware won't have any significant advantage over a CPU. And it's been tested.
I mean, we'll see.
We'll see.
I mean, I think I remember. I mean, Litecoin, that was one of their original sales pitches.
But they didn't develop anything really that unique in terms of proof of work. This is a randomized proof of work algorithm.
I think Ethereum did. I think they developed their own.
Yeah, Prague Power or whatever it was. And
now we have Ethereum ASICs as well too. So
wasn't developed by Howard Chiu.
I don't know. Good. We'll have to see what happens there.
But yeah, no, definitely keep your eye on that. So that's going to be in the next Monero upgrade, which is in November. That's November 30th, I think, is when it actually kicks in. But so what's your feeling on that? So yeah, I mean that's another thing, right? So that when you think of Monero versus Bitcoin, the privacy, default privacy, the tail emission, which ensures security of the chain. And then I think this is the other kind of major pillar, which is the efforts put into maintain the original concept or ideal concept of one CPU, one vote for the purposes of creating a decentralized, an ideal decentralized network. Where kind of permissionless, anybody with access to a CPU can opt into the network and start using it. So what's kind of your opinion there on whether or not, I guess, is that something necessary? CPU, one vote should that be something that a cryptocurrency should try to achieve, or is it not really?
I mean, it sounds good in theory, but I mean, it's been tried many times and it just doesn't seem to be possible. And it seems like it ends up being that a better solution would be to make ASICs, as easy to make as possible, because then they're like more commoditized, and you end up with a better result that way.
I think that is the idea with Monero long run, right? So this is kind of the interim, and then eventually, when producing an ASIC is as easy as producing a CPU or as widely available, then you've achieved that goal.
Yeah, I mean, I do. When you talk about like the different features of Monero, some people talk about it as kind of like a backup plan for Bitcoin. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, just because I think it would be more likely for Bitcoin to be like hard forked in like a disaster scenario, like I said, rather than, everyone moves over to Monero or some other altcoin. Just because I think with Bitcoin's much larger network effects, I think the incentive is for everyone to kind of stay over there.
So is your feeling then? I mean, obviously, I guess it is. So like the first mover advantage, the network effect, is really what Bitcoin's value is. I mean, more than anything else, that's kind of its largest asset is the fact that it has the network effect. You don't think that could potentially be overcome by something that solves some of its issues?
I mean, I'm open to the idea. I just haven't seen, any project that I think would be capable of doing that. Yeah, it's not necessarily that like Bitcoin's monetary policy was perfect when it was released. It was just that it was first, and over time it's seems like the most credible that it won't be changed. So yeah.
No, but we're starting to see. So you wrote your article about the miners even bringing up the fact, or the mining pools bringing up their concern about the lack of privacy in Bitcoin. We're starting to see other examples of the effects of the fact that Bitcoin isn't private and truly fungible. Do you think that's going to continue to become kind of more mainstream and realized and have an effect on the ecosystem, potentially pushing more people into something like Monero? So, I mean, yes, maybe Bitcoin adopts confidential transactions one day, but they haven't today. And currently today, Monero more closely resembles digital cash, and in my opinion, digital gold, minus the not having as large a network effect, but on a fundamental level, in that every unit of Monero equals every other unit of Monero, just like every atom of gold equals every atom of gold. Do you think that's going to start to become more realized as we have more of these kind of events? The most recent one being the takedown of that child porn dark website. Obviously, horrible thing. Great that it was taken down, but ironically, it also exposes kind of the flaw of Bitcoin, and it was the flaw of Bitcoin that allowed it to be taken down. But it creates kind of this more public realization that one Bitcoin doesn't equal one Bitcoin. Do you think that's kind of a growing story?
So yeah, this kind of gets into like people caring about protecting their personal data and online privacy more generally. So if you look at like people opting out of Facebook or switching from Google to DuckDuckGo, things like that, it does seem like people are starting to make some move there. But I mean, like, still all of my non-Bitcoin friends post on Instagram and Facebook all day and use Google and don't care really about free software. They've never heard of Jitsi, what we're using to do this live stream.
Well, I guess the difference there is not so. I agree with you that, I mean, people don't care about privacy all that much, right? As long as they're getting their free Facebook and their, they don't care that they're the product, so to speak. But when it starts to affect your potentially your wallet, right? So, you have $1 million worth of Bitcoin, and you wake up one day and realize, wait a minute, everybody knows how much I have, and potentially how much I have, and whenever I send it to somebody, they know who I'm sending it to. So it's a little, it's a lot more of a realization and a worry and direct concern than, okay, Facebook knows that I like skateboarding. This is like about people's money, people's bank accounts, and the thought that, their money could potentially be, censored. Their dollars may not be worth the same as somebody else's dollars.
Yeah.
So I do see, you don't see that being more of a potential concern?
I think right now people, like I said, are just worried about getting access to Bitcoin as a store of value, and they're not really, transacting as much, and they just think about that. But eventually, yes, those features are needed. And Bitcoin, I think another point that's worth bringing up is like Bitcoin is it's starting to make people have to care about computer security, whether they want to or not, with things like ransomware and things like that, where, potentially previously a security hole in your system just meant someone had access to it and they couldn't really, maybe they had no way to monetize it, although a lot of times there were. Now they just put some ransomware on there, and if you get hacked or something, or someone gains access to your computer, and you want to get your files back, you have to pay hundreds or thousands of dollars or whatever. If maybe someone, there's those like scam emails that people send out where it's like they say they hacked your computer and they caught you watching porn, and if you don't send them, $1,000 worth of Bitcoin, then they'll send all the porn you were watching to your friends or whatever, friends and family. So I think we're still kind of far away from, maybe not too far, but we're still pretty far away from people caring about these kinds of things. And I think eventually it's more likely once people start caring more about privacy, they'll adopt it on layers on top of Bitcoin rather than Monero directly.
Fair enough. So do you own any Monero? Do you
I don't.
dabble in any altcoins? Okay.
Well, back in the day, I was actually when I was like first looking at altcoins in probably 2013, 2014, trying to figure out whether or not, do these things have value? Could they be a threat to Bitcoin? There was one called like Anon Coin that I thought was interesting for like the same reasons people think Monero is interesting. And I was like, because this was getting back to what we talked about at first. Back then, I thought like the Silk Road use case was basically like the main value proposition. So I was like, well, if this is more private, then it's going to take over Bitcoin, and I should buy some before that happens. So I think I did have some Anon Coin at one point. But other than that, it's just been Bitcoin.
Yeah, like I'm saying, and you don't see these other elements being a part of the store of value use case. See, that's where I
do, but I think.
But overall, network effect is the most important aspect of store of value.
Yeah, I think we're still in like the beta phase, kind of, and people are just putting their money in the expectation that those features will eventually be there.
Eventually, okay.
Because, like I said, people aren't really using it to transact much at all. Like the main, like 90% of activity is related to exchanges. So it's just people buying, selling, or just buying and holding. For the vast majority of people, that's what they're doing with Bitcoin and cryptocurrency.
Yeah, totally agree. Totally agree with that. But I mean, you would still think they'd want it to be fungible and even if it's just sitting there. I don't know. But
I think the network effects, I guess, just outweigh the other factors at this point.
Right. It would just have to be something so critical. And then I guess only time will tell whether or not those flaws actually are critical, based on the events that happen. So I guess I have to do a quick sponsor pitch here. It's Cake Wallet. Do you ever use well, I guess you don't use Monero at all. If you were to use Monero and you had an iPhone, I would recommend Cake Wallet. So I
think I've heard of them. So yeah,
we recommend Cake Wallet to the Monero community. They're open source. You hold your own keys. So they're the premier iOS wallet. That was a big thing for Monero. Monero didn't have an iOS wallet for a long time. Monero kind of being its own protocol. As I'm sure I don't know how closely you followed it, but it was a little slow to develop these things. It was kind of more of...
It didn't even have a GUI for a while.
Yeah, it didn't have a GUI for a while. It was just more of a hacker's coin. But now it's finally growing up. Cool. Yeah. So when it first launched its iOS wallet, that was a big deal, and Cake was the first one to do that. And it's so they're our show sponsor. So yeah, if you're looking to buy Monero and you want to easily store it and send it, recommend Cake Wallet for the iOS. I think they'll be coming out with an Android version soon as well. I don't know if that's supposed to be public information, but it is now. So yeah, man, anything, let's see, what else could I pick your brain on? I mean, so you're essentially, do you consider yourself a Bitcoin maximalist, or you don't like those labels?
I mean I guess that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't really see, I mean, the altcoins I kind of just look at as test nets. And I like to wonder, like, would people be buying these things if people just called them test nets instead of altcoins?
Yeah, I certainly see some of it. Like Litecoin is most certainly a test net.
Yeah. They kind of like pivoted from silver to Bitcoin's gold to Bitcoin's test net.
Right.
And I think they're going to do like a Mimblewimble sidechain now, which...
Yeah, they've been talking about that.
Which Monero is also doing.
Yeah, through Tari.
Which actually I don't even... So maybe I could ask you, what is the consensus mechanism for the Mimblewimble sidechain on Monero? Like, is it a federated peg, or is it... Because my understanding is like...
Tari is essentially going to be its own protocol that's going to be a side chain off of Monero. So two completely separate things. I don't know the exact details of the mechanism between how the two chains will communicate. I don't have all those details.
Yeah.
But yeah, basically Tari is going to be built on top, or going to be built using Mimblewimble, is my understanding.
Yeah, because it was originally like sidechains were going to kill off all the altcoins, and that was like
never happened.
Five or so years ago.
Right.
And now we kind of just have the federated system with Liquid. Paul Stortz is still working on drive chains. Those seem to always be like a couple months away for the past 2 years or so.
Yeah, the idea of Tari. So yeah, it's gonna kind of be like a way of doing colored coins and things like that, using so similar to what's the one on Bitcoin, the side chain of Bitcoin that never really took off. That's kind of the Ethereum for
Liquid. Oh, RSK.
No, RSK. Yeah. So
yeah,
I think some similarities there. Yeah. Why is that? Why do you think like something like RSK never took off?
Well, right now I think they do have a majority of the hash rate behind it. Last time I checked, but I think it's still just in early stages where, if you want to develop on it, you got to be whitelisted. I think it's technically live on mainnet, but there's just I think there just aren't any apps for it right now. I know there's a company called Money on Chain working on like a MakerDAO type thing, which I'm not entirely sure will end up working for the long term. Like the stabilized, like the DAI token having a stable value. It seems like there's a lot of like economic trickery going on there that may not actually work. I think it's very speculative. I'm more like, and in terms of the stable coins, like whether it's backed by, money in a bank account like Tether, or if it's some algorithmic stable coin like DAI, it seems like there's still always some point of centralization. So I don't know if those are going to be like sufficiently censorship resistant. Because my understanding with DAI is they use like a federation of oracles to feed the price into the system. So instead of going after like, the central bank account, they just go after the oracles that are feeding the data into the system. So I think there's protocols like Augur and Bitcoin Hive Mind that would kind of decentralize the oracle system. So you could maybe have a truly decentralized stablecoin eventually, but those are still very much like unproven in terms of whether or not those decentralized oracles can be trusted. So yeah, I mean, that's why I think the stable coins don't really make sense to me, because you still have that point of centralization. And I know they're allowing things like Tether and Coinbase's stable coin to exist right now, but I think eventually they have to, like, that goes back into what I was saying about like CoinJoin and confidential transactions on Liquid, which that'd be interesting if someone did CoinJoin and confidential transactions on Liquid, because then maybe they would shut down Liquid or something, but they would also probably like shut down, they'd have to shut down Ripple, all the stable coins, EOS, like anything sufficiently centralized, they would also have to go after.
Yeah, that hasn't made sense to me either. The concept of something like Tether and stable coins. I mean, it's great in theory, but I feel like it's
well, it's like eGold and Liberty Reserve.
Right. Exactly. If it was created before Bitcoin, it would have been shut down right away. And then it's like, all right, because things like Bitcoin exist, now it's allowed to exist, even though it could easily be shut down and it's centralized. It's kind of odd.
It seems like there's just not a good enough understanding among regulators and lawmakers. So
right. It's been conflated, so they've just allowed it to kind of exist. So yeah, I guess at some point that will change, and unless Libra becomes the kind of the one and only existing stable coin. I don't know. But at that point,
that's what they say. Like central bank digital currencies will kill Bitcoin. Some people say that, but it's like they're not going to allow anonymous transactions. They're going to try to implement negative interest rates. They're going to do all these things where they still have control. So it's just a completely different thing than what Bitcoin is.
Yep, exactly, man. Well, great talk. I don't anything else you want to talk about in terms of Monero? Do you have any Monero topics?
I know I've written about Monero a few times, because I remember back in the day when Alphabay adopted Monero, that was like a big thing. In terms of now, there was a report from Europool where they were talking about how people on the darknet market still tend to use Bitcoin just because of like network effects, and that's what they're used to and things like that. I think it was Europool. I might be misremembering.
Which is just crazy to me. I mean, you would think people in that realm would be thinking about how best to.
Yeah, it's interesting to
hide themselves. Like, why wouldn't they go take the extra step of using the better technology for those purposes?
Well, it seems like a lot of them just go on coin. Like like to track the chatter on the darknet markets and stuff like that, and I don't follow it as closely as I used to, but it seems like a lot of them still just like go on Coinbase, buy some Bitcoin, send it to like through like 2 or 3 different wallets. Like a lot of them don't even use like Wasabi wallet or Samurai wallet, like the Bitcoin privacy wallets. And then yeah, sometimes they'll say like transfer it to Monero and then transfer it back or something like that. But I think that kind of defeats the purpose because you can still correlate the 2 Bitcoin transactions on either end and see that they're related. So yeah, it's I guess people are kind of just, they need the censorship resistance kind of more than the privacy, or that's what they think. But
yeah, until it catches up to them.
I mean, if you're I mean, if you're just buying like $50 worth of weed on the darknet, I guess you don't really care as much probably. So there's that. So maybe like I know a lot of, I mean, in that report from Europool, Monero was the only other coin they talked about at all. So there's that. I think they mentioned Dash like in passing once as well. But yeah, the Monero, I think, but a lot of the talk around Monero was around like cryptojacking. So like getting other people's computers to mine Monero for on the hackers' benefit. So, and I think that might have more to do with how Monero is mined, maybe rather than just the privacy features. Probably a combination of both.
Yeah. What's your opinion on that? Do you see that as an indication of anything? Like, so the fact that they're choosing Monero versus other coins, do you think that's significant? Or
I mean, they would probably choose Bitcoin, but obviously everyone doesn't have an ASIC hooked up to their laptop. So I guess they, I know a lot of, I don't remember the source, but someone was talking about the mining that goes on in Venezuela. They stopped mining Bitcoin because it was like too easy for the authorities to realize they were mining, and then so they would come and steal all their equipment and start mining Bitcoin for the government. So they switched to like GPU mining, but the people who are mining would take the altcoins that they mined and sell them for Bitcoin still. So I get all roads lead to Bitcoin eventually, it seems.
For now.
For now, yeah.
So yeah, man, thanks for coming on. Thanks for all the work you do. Your articles are really great. So I recommend anybody who's watching this to check you out. I'm sure they already do. You're hard to miss. You're all over the place. Yeah, keep doing what you're doing. Thank you. And
thanks for having me.
Yeah, would love for you to, investigate further into the Monero world. Maybe
I'll definitely track RandomX.
Check out RandomX. That's going to be a big one.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's it. Great show, man. Thank you. Thank you for the candor.
Yep.
All right, man. I'll talk to you. Have a good one.
You too.
All right. Bye.
See ya.